I want to say thank you to Brian Mavis for joining us today. He's the president of America's Kids Belong. Larry May was kind enough to get some of Brian's time for us, so very appreciative to Indiana Kids Belong as well. So I'll start off. My name is Mike Shigren, and I work with For Evansville as a part of this foster care coalition group that has been meeting from time to time since January of, is it 18, Jonathan? 2018, does that sound right to you?
I think so, yeah.
Man, that feels like a lot longer than it. Yeah, okay, so, and the initial get together for the Foster Care Coalition kind of came about because of Brian Mavis's first visit to Evansville. He joined the One Community, One Church luncheon and kind of shared about foster care, and we got to hear some real statistics and realities for Southwest Indiana here in Region 16, and a number of churches wanted to respond in some way but weren't necessarily sure how. So we wanted to get together and talk about who's doing what can we learn from each other, and how can we respond in a way that is beneficial to the community and to these children representing the most vulnerable population in our area. So yeah, with that, I'd just like to kind of turn it over to Brian and hear a little bit more about America's Kids Belong. I don't think that everybody here is as familiar as, probably Larry May is, and just anything at all that you want to share with us. So thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thanks, Mike, and everybody for taking time for this. And I'll sprinkle in a little bit about America's Kids Belong, but really want to kind of start thinking about what's happening right now in our moment and what's happening in Indiana. So obviously we are in unprecedented times, or at least unprecedented in our lifetime, with a global pandemic that has caused various levels of quarantining, and then the most recent cultural tensions and race relations. And so you might be thinking, why are we talking about foster care when we've got these two big issues facing us right now? The COVID-19 quarantine is already impacting child welfare to such an extent that they've already have coined a new phrase for what they're anticipating, which is called the October flood. And what they mean by that is, since the quarantine has started about essentially 100 days ago, kids who were vulnerable for extreme neglect or abuse and in a dangerous situation, they usually had outlets in school, particularly, to be seen, to be heard, and to be checked on. Since the quarantine has happened, there's that outlet for safety has disappeared. And in fact, nationwide, the number of calls into child welfare to check on children has decreased by over 30%. So, but what hospitals are saying is they're seeing abuse cases and they're more severe than normal. And so there's this tension between what seems like good news, that there's not as many reporting happening, but that doesn't mean that there's not abuse happening. It's just not being seen and reported. And so part of what's causing this, of course, is homes that have tension. COVID has just made it worse. Then you've got other exasperating factors of foster families also are feeling tension, of not having relief with normal child care, that kind of thing. And so they're on the verge of wanting to quit. We've got issues of attempts for reunification that normally happen with periodic visits, usually at least once or twice a week, with bio families. They haven't been able to do that. And so the whole system has been impacted in some profound ways. So in summary, there's already not enough foster families that exist for the amount of kids that exist. And they're anticipating in October a flood of new kids coming into the system, a possible shrinking of the foster families available because they're stressed out. Now, let me add to that. There's also a new law called the Family First Initiative, and compliance was meant to take place over like a year ago, but it's been delayed. Now it's meant to be take place this year. One of the key things that this law does is start closing down group homes that are housing these kids. So the reason group homes exist is because there's not enough foster families. And so now research has shown that kids thrive better in families. So this law, with good intentions, is saying, let's not even make group homes an option, at least in most cases. And so they're closing down these group homes, but they don't have a place for these kids to go because, again, there are not enough families. So that's kind of a double whammy, a little bit of a perfect storm. And then let me address the race relations thing as well. I mean, churches all around the country, I've never seen anything like it, all pausing to think and speak and listen on this issue. Really, I don't even remember 9/11 having this effect where churches actually stopped and taught on something like this. And it's my opinion that if you want to get involved in this issue in a way that is meaningful, it's beyond listening to a sermon, it's beyond reading a book, it's getting involved in foster care, because foster care, in my estimation, is one of the most cross-section, ethnic cross-section, racial cross-section ministry and work you can be a part of. I mean, I know a lot of families who are multiracial because of the foster care life that they stepped into, whether it's temporary or permanent through adoption. And I've seen churches transform from being mostly homogenous ethnically to having this diversity happen because they got involved in this issue. So I'm just wanting to frame like, hey, what we're talking about today is extremely relevant, even more relevant than it was 6 months ago, because of the crisis is being compounded, and what seems to be unrelated is very related to this issue. So that's why I think it's important that you guys are on this call at this time, and that you're not paying attention on this call to something that's on the sidelines that should be peripheral. This should be front and center. So again, taking a step back and sharing what the need is. I'll share my screen here a little bit. Let's see here. Okay, so let's just start here with, we'll zoom out to the country, and then we'll come into Indiana, and I'll have Larry speak a little bit about Indiana. So these numbers are just very rounded numbers. They're all underestimated. I could say the numbers are closer to 450 here of the number of kids. If you took a snapshot, how many kids are in foster care, it's over 400,000. Of that group, 100,000 of them, closer to 125,000, are in a category referred to as legally free, meaning that parental rights have been terminated, and in a sense, they are without a legal family and are in a place to be adopted by another family. 300,000 of them are on a track working towards reunification. It's not the kid who is working towards reunification, it's the parents who are trying to do the work that has been determined by the judge of, like, here's what you need to do to prove that you're safe enough to parent again. And then about 26,000 kids this year will age out of the system, meaning they typically turned aged 18, and they've aged out without a connection to a family. In Indiana, Larry, I'm going to have you speak through the next couple of slides. Can you explain this scenario of the need, what's happening in your state?
Sure. So 13,000 kids in out-of-home foster care. Interesting that we included, another stat we included on this slide was the percentage of those kids that are placed out of their county of residence. That's really tough on kids to go into foster care to begin with, but because of the shortage of foster homes, makes it tougher when they have to move school systems, move away from friends, that kind of thing. 1,400 kids. That first slide said there's 100,000 kids available for adoption, legally free for adoption. That number is 1,400 in Indiana. And in Indiana, it's not as clear about how many actually age out of foster care, because Indiana does provide some services up through a few years after age 18. They've done a good job there. But certainly there are a number of them that are aging out without family, a bunch of them. Need to say too that there's some good things happening. DCS or the governor hired Director Terry Stigdon back in January 2018. She's a really solid leader who loves kids and is passionate about solving some problems here. DCS has been hiring more staff to reduce caseloads, and they have done some cool things to extend support for the kids aging out. So, and we would say that Indiana's been very warm to us as we've met with them several times to try to gin up support and awareness engagement across the state. So a lot of good things happening in Indiana. Don't want to understate the problem, but there's some good momentum. So taking it down even a little more narrow, in Region 16, so DCS has 18 regions in the state. Our region is a 6-county region. Luke, you're just outside the region, but we're happy you're here in Washington. But all the rest of you would be in Region 16. So there's 775 kids in out-of-home foster care placements. In our region, it's even worse than the state level. 47% of the kids, when they leave their home because of abuse and neglect, they're going to have that double whammy of being moved out of the child's county of residence, largely because of the lack of availability of foster care, foster homes in their area. 397 of those 775 are in relative placement, and DCS is trying to provide more recruitment in that area to try to get, first choice is always to try to find a family member that can care for a child when they've been temporarily removed from their home. 378, so about half and half are in relative placement versus everything else. Group homes, foster homes, etc. Wanted to call attention to the right side of that slide though. When we've talked to DCS about what they need, they certainly need more foster homes, but the challenge is a little deeper than that. They need foster homes that are flexible. And if you look at the demographics on the right-hand side, for example, right now, there are 84 foster homes who have said, because when you decide to be a foster parent, you tell DCS who you're willing to take, what kinds of kids, what ages, gender, et cetera, special needs, that kind of thing. 84 homes are open to girls age 4 and younger, but only 19 are open to girls age 14 and older. Same statistical problem with boys. Generally, a lot of people want to have babies and toddlers. Not a lot of people want to have teenagers. Also, it's hard to place sibling groups. We have a lot of situations where siblings are in foster care and are separated because homes can't take or won't, are not flexible to take this. Everybody's got their own situation. Certainly don't want to sound critical, but many homes can't take siblings. And so we need more foster homes in Region 16, but we also need more foster homes willing to take teenagers, sibling groups, and special needs kids. So that's, I think, Brian, unless you had any other questions or wanted to add anything, that's pretty much the synopsis of where we are, Indiana and Region 16.
Got it. Thanks. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen, but want to try to make this not feel like just a PowerPoint presentation. So I want to pause for a second and mention, elaborate a little bit on something that Larry said, and then share a little story, kind of propel us forward. So half the kids that are in foster care who are getting placed outside of Region 16, where most of you are from. So that's because they're like, we just don't have any families to put them into. So we're having to export these kids somewhere else. Imagine being a kid, 5, 10, 14 years old, and your situation at home is so precarious that the courts think that you need to be removed from your home for your safety's sake. And then you probably have siblings as well. And that's bad. And, it's bad enough that what's happened at home. Being removed is another, it was the right thing to do, help protect you, but it's also another disruption in your life. Hopefully, no more disruptions. But when you're being exported out of your region, now you're probably being separated from your siblings. You are being removed from your friends, removed from your school, removed from your teachers, your coaches, everything you knew and everyone you know who was your safety outlet is now gone also, because there aren't enough families in your region to help keep these kids intact. My daughter, who's a professional tennis coach, and was coaching at a high level in England, she said she called when you're moving a child from one level to the next level, they said there are 3 things you can do. A little kid moving up, you can change the size of their court to a little bit bigger court. You can change the speed of the ball. They usually start with a bigger, softer, slower ball. Or you can change the size of the racket. She said all coaches know to only change one thing. She said if you change more than one, they refer to it as tennis trauma. And so that they're so sensitive to these kids that they only have one change in their growth in their life. And here we're like, you can not only lose what stability you had in just your neighborhood, we're taking you out of everything that was normal to you. So that's why it's, again, so important that we have the families in your community being part of the solution. So in 2007, I was on staff of this church, Life Bridge, and in overseeing community transformation. I was a foster parent, and I had a child welfare worker who I didn't know call me and say, can I meet with you to talk about child welfare? I said, sure. So this lady, Cindy Malika, came a couple of days later. We met in the lobby of the church. The first thing she said to me was, thanks for meeting with me. I've been trying to meet with the church for 3 years. You're the first one to say yes. So I apologize that had been her experience, at child welfare's experience with the church. She came back to my office and she said, Brian, I really just came here to tell you one thing. In the 27-year history of child welfare in this county, there's never been one day, not one single day, where kids have not been waiting for families to take care of them, where kids have not been waiting for grown-ups to step up and to take them in. And she said, we got kids sleeping in county buildings and group homes. And she said, I have a challenge for you. Can you help me change who waits? Can you help me recruit so many grown-ups that they're the ones on the waiting list and not the kids? So at that moment, I felt like that calling was coming from someone else beyond her, and felt compelled to accept that challenge. And a year later, we helped fulfill that goal. We increased recruitment in the county by 96% in 1 year and had changed the supply and demand equation. That challenge has continued to haunt me, and I'm convinced that what happened in one county at one time can happen in every county at all times, and can happen in your guys's county. So I want to look at another thing. So this is a newer example in Colorado, in Jefferson County. So the county I was talking about was Boulder County, is about a half hour north of Denver. It's smaller, more affluent. This is Jefferson County, one of the largest counties in Colorado. It's essentially West Denver. And this county had a group meeting on a regular basis called the Power of Partnership. It was essentially faith leaders, nonprofit leaders, and government social workers all meeting together on a regular basis. One of their initiatives was foster care. For the 8 years that they were meeting, they had no net gains in their foster family numbers. And so they invited us in a couple of years ago and said, can you just, help us see if we can turn this around? And so we did. We applied. We went specifically just working through we met with child welfare, got their goals, worked through the church community, and I'll just show you what happened from the most recent 2 years to the preceding our work to the work that we've done now. So in 2016, this again, net gain of foster families. They're recruiting families all the time, but they lost 10 more than they recruited in 2016. In 2017, they lost another 3 in their net. So we started in, and while they continued to lose families, we not only helped them lose fewer in that the fact that we started working around a wraparound so that their attrition wouldn't shrink and they have higher retention rates, and we recruited as well. They got a net gain of 28 families. And then the next year we added onto that another 22 families. And so again, this is just a more recent example of a big county and how we were able to start turning around their losses into gains. So if I were in your place, and I was at one time in a church, we at that time when I was there had 60 community partnerships of things that we could do to try to be the best church, not just in the community, but the best church for the community. So we had stuff for cleaning trails and caring for animals, and also, addiction recovery, all those kinds of things. And I personally got convicted that we were a mile wide and an inch deep. And so much of what we did was transactional and not real true transformational, incarnational, life change kinds of things. So I decided that we were going to do fewer things and do a few things really well, go really deep, that might lead us appropriately at the right time into these other spaces. And so when we made that decision, we chose a focus on vulnerable kids, and the place where we found the most vulnerable of the vulnerable was in foster care. During that time, we began to see how by being involved in this space, it connected us to so many other things. So when kids who are in foster care, who end up not getting connected to a family, not having permanency, whether it's a reunification to a family that's been stabilized and recovering, or into a new family, and then these kids are aging out, cutting loose, not being connected to the family, they are a pipeline to a bunch of other social wounds that churches try to fix. So kids who age out, not connected to the family, are 2.5 times more likely than military combat veterans to suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder. They're 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide. They're the most vulnerable group in the country to being sex trafficked. And then it just goes on and on. They far more likely than it appears to be, struggle with addiction. Half of them don't even graduate from high school. A third continue to live in poverty. A lot of them become homeless. Big pipeline to homelessness. Huge pipeline to being incarcerated. Girls are 3 times more likely than their peers to be pregnant by the age of 19. And they are by far the most vulnerable group in the United States to losing their own kids to the foster care system, leading it all over again. So again, the part of what I'm trying to do is persuade you as to the importance of this issue, because I am, sincerely, we need churches who are focusing and have something where they're helping with crisis pregnancy, homelessness, addiction, with Celebrate Recovery, those kinds of things, human trafficking, all that. But I'm just appealing to you, say, what if you could work on one thing that could touch all those things? And what if you could help a kid not need any of those ministries 10 years from now because they're in a family? So this is not just some feel-good heart issue. It's a smart issue. And then when people think, hey, this is also just kind of a sideline social thing, and maybe we shouldn't preach on this, I'm convinced this is one of the greatest discipleship things you can do as well. You want to disciple someone, have a kid come live with you for 12 weeks or 12 months or 12 years. I mean, there's a good opportunity for discipleship. And it turns out that you're being discipled as well. I mean, you're doing this not to make them a Christian. You might hope that, but you're doing it because you are one. And so I became absolutely convinced that you cannot divorce Jesus from justice, and you can't divorce justice from Jesus, and that this issue isn't some sideline social sprinkle thing, and that the church has to do the real work of Jesus doing something else. I think this is a dead center in the gospel. And so I'm trying to take what is on the margins of the church's mind and get it centered in here. So back to sharing the screen a little bit more of what's next. So there's a way, a way to think about this issue is to think of the people in it and being in 3 groups. So I call it the heroes, the healers, and the helpers. The heroes are the kids. They're the ones who've been in a battle. They're the wounded warriors, and they're the ones that we need to be putting at the center. That's kid first. This isn't a thing about how can I build my family? How can I heal holes in my heart? This is about putting the kids' interests first and doing whatever is best for them. The next group out are the healers. So healers could be caseworkers, people working specifically with the kids. But at this moment in this talk, I want to have it focus in on the healers are the people open up their hearts and homes to these kids. They're the foster and adoptive families. This is obviously a very important category, but one of the problems here is that being a healer is can be very hard, very messy, and the attrition rate is extreme. Essentially, again, national average is it shrinks by 50% a year. So if 100 families started today, joined today, became foster families, a year from now, only 50 would be left. When you go 5 years out, you're down to about 8 out of that original 100, unless you get the next group out, and that's the helpers. These are families who said, we're not in a place to foster or adopt, but we want to foster a foster family. We want to adopt a family. And this group does all the things that they can do. If you can babysit, that's great. If you can help with carpooling, that's great. If you can bring muffins over, that's great. Help with math assignments, all those kinds of things. Pray for them to help people who feel like they're not alone. So the problem, though, is this is what your scenario looks like in southwestern Indiana. There are a lot more heroes than there are the healers and helpers. And so that's the scenario that's the problem. Here's what we're trying to fix and make this the solution, that there is more than enough healers and helpers. We mean, ideally, we would love to see a 1-to-1 ratio. If there's 400 kids that need families, that there would be 400 families available. Of course, some families would be having siblings, and so you'd say, well, maybe it seems like you've got more than you need. That's what we want. We want more than enough. Sometimes families will need a break. They're not quitting, but if they go like, okay, if we can take a rest every 3 months, after having a kid for 9 months, that kind of thing. And also just gives more options to caseworkers on keeping kids close, that kind of thing. And then having a ratio that's beyond 1-to-1, maybe more like at least 3-to-1 of helpers. So that gives everybody something to do to help keep things strong and sustainable. So just real quick, what we do, this is kind of go back again, as AKB and Indiana's Kids Belong, we kind of use a model that is a 3 legs of the stool. We work with government, we work with the faith and nonprofit communities, and we work with business, tie it all together with storytelling. Today we're looking just at that middle leg of the faith and nonprofits. And we're hoping that sometime in the future, we're going to be able to do a statewide campaign with the heads of child welfare, with your governor. We've done that, and several other states have had amazing results, but it definitely takes time to build that and build trust and build a coalition. One of the things that we do to kind of get building that coalition and getting things started is we have a project called the I Belong Project, which is kids who are legally free, who need families. We did our very first one towards the very end of the year of 2019. And then of these 9 boys, and then we shared it on Indiana Kids Belong Facebook page. And just this post alone got over 16,000 shares, resulting in hundreds of inquiries on these 9 boys who hadn't been inquired on at all over the prior couple of years. So since that video shoot, there was a second one as well, just right before the quarantine hit. I think another 13 kids were there. In fact, if possible, let's see if I can get there. I wanted to show real quick. Let me show you just, again, one of the most recent videos. This is an older girl. Older kids are the toughest to recruit for. They're actually labeled hard to adopt or hard to place. And that's not because the kid, anything that is about the kid other than that they're older. It's more an indictment on us that they're considered hard, not on them. So let me share just this video of this gal here in Indiana who needs a family. All right, so that's Bree, 15 years old, and it's not politically correct to use this language, but she's a legal orphan. And I cannot believe there's not a family in the state of Indiana that doesn't exist, that she just will never be in a family. I can't believe that's true. And so one of the things that we're hoping that the church will do is start advocating for these kids and showing, these videos, or let people know that these kids exist, and say, maybe your family could be Bree's family. And as Larry mentioned, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids in that same situation that Bree is in Indiana. So we could see these numbers decrease. In Colorado, years ago when we had 800 kids, my wife started leaning in on this issue. We got the numbers from 800 down to 280 in a matter of about 4 to 5 years. So I think you guys can do the same thing. I'm going to try to just whip through a couple more things real quickly here. the church is in an ideal place to doing making an impact. The church has a unique motivation. It's been studied and shown that practicing Christians are 3 times more likely to consider fostering than the general public. The church is just gigantic nationally. I took the most conservative numbers of 17% of the U.S. population is attending a church on any given Sunday. That's 55 million people. That's 50 times more people who attend every football game on any given Sunday. And then 132 million people have some church attendance. So it's just a gigantic group of people. And then our distribution. I mean, there are churches everywhere. There are churches in the city, churches in the suburbs, churches in the country. I mean, the church is the solution. The government cannot solve this. If they could have, they would have by now. And so one of the key things that we do in our vision for you guys is to change you weights. We use this 4R framework, which is founded on relationships and then it builds on research, retention, and recruitment. And so looking at this, really this idea of, everything that we want you to do, it has to do with, first of all, getting to know who's already involved in this space. I'm convinced that your church is already involved in this ministry. You just may not know it because there's people that are there's caseworkers and CASA volunteers and foster families and adoptive families. And so it's to get to know them, it's get to know people in your community that are doing this. And then we say, really the place to start is research. If I could give you guys an assignment, is to say, find out in your church who already is involved in this issue, and then ask them, how are you doing? What you'll discover is they're going to say, we're drowning. We need help. This is hard, it's messy, and we feel alone. And so, which will hopefully compel you to take the next step of retention. And so retention, we've got tools to help with you starting a wraparound ministry, doing a foster parents night out, helping, giving them a break and meeting these kids, trauma training materials, those kinds of things. So just to help these families feel like I'm not alone. Finally, I'm being seen, I'm being thanked, I'm being supported. And this attrition rate that'll happen, these families who are on the verge of quitting, who are doing something remarkable, will hang in there and be supported. And then finally, when you start building up these holes in the buckets, you go back to recruiting more families, and they're more likely to say yes because they know that they also are going to be supported. So finally, just kind of next steps. What we'd like for you to do is identify a point person in your church, this kind of foster care champion, and maybe you are that point person. Maybe it's a staff person, maybe it's a passionate volunteer. If you could only do one thing right now, it would be to do that. And then, but 2 more asks is that you stay connected to this group, the Foster Care Coalition, connect to Mike, know about just what future things are going to happen. And then the next steps are to connect to Larry, who's leading this initiative in Indiana, and he could help with your point person on their next steps, giving them this research documents, surveys of like how to survey well in your church, how to survey beyond your church if you want to, how to do this retention stuff, to where we can know then, like, okay, we've got this many kids in our town. This is how much of a difference we would need to make to close that gap and change who waits. So I want to pause, protect your time, but also open it up to any questions you guys have, any directions that Mike might want to give, or Larry or Jonathan. Take it away, whoever.
I always forget that I'm double muted. I have one here and another one on the screen. Yeah, are there any questions at all for Brian in response to anything that was just shared at this point? It's okay if there's not, but if there are, feel free to jump in at any point.
Can you hear me? This
Yes.
is Susan Spalding. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Susan.
Hi. I'm sorry, I had to change devices in order for you to hear me.
I understand.
We're Washington, Indiana, Free Methodist Church, and for over a year now, we have been hosting gatherings for foster parents. And we have just now, and we had foster parents to come to speak. Some have had taken in 70 to 100 foster children in their lives, for the foster parents to be encouraged to try to get the need out there in the community of the overwhelming need for foster parents. Of course, scripture tells us, and it should be in our heart, to take care of the orphans. And that's what we've been endeavoring to do. We have just joined efforts with Borrowed Hearts of Evansville. And
Excellent.
we're opening Borrowed Hearts here, Davis County. And we're trying to get the whole of Davis County all together on this and get it going, to encourage and to bring on. And, you know, as this man just stated very beautifully, that's what we're trying to do here. And I'm just so thankful to hear other people on the same on the same wavelength, because we are trying to, you know, to unite CASA, DCS, all foster families, and, you know, to get something going here. It's a shame how bad it's gotten. It's a shame. And we're doing a lot. There's several of us. We just formed a board for Borrowed Hearts Davis County. And anyway, it's been very interesting. I appreciate all that you're doing too.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, you're certainly not alone, and it is really beneficial to realize that as well, that there are more of us than each of us individually concerned about this. So yeah, thank you for joining, Susan. Really glad that you could join us for this. Susan mentioned Borrowed Hearts. I just wanted to share that that is a local organization dedicated to working in foster care, working for foster families, providing resources for them. That ministry grew out of CFC that's Mike Deeg's church. I don't think he's on the call anymore, but they're a great local organization. I just wanted to really quickly list off a few other wins from the past year. I meant to do this at the beginning and jumped right over it. I apologize, but highlight some of the other work that's going on already here in Southwest Indiana that if you're not aware of, you should be, because there are opportunities to jump in there as well. We are very close to opening the Isaiah 117 house. This is a ministry dedicated to providing a transition space for foster children when there is not immediately a home available. This would not be another foster home, but rather you don't have to sleep in the DCS offices tonight home. So that's something we're excited to see opening up very soon.
Mike,
go ahead,
I think that ribbon cutting is actually July 20th. There's a ribbon cutting.
I just got the invitation. I couldn't remember, but yeah.
Pretty cool.
It is very cool. As you are already aware, if you're on this call, Larry May is with Indiana Kids Belong, the Indiana chapter of America's Kids Belong. It's up and running. We saw one of the videos already as a result of that partnership, and we're really excited to have that connection here in our state. Myself, Larry, and Melissa Meyer, who is with the Isaiah 117 house, we've all been invited to join this is a mouthful, the DCS Region 16 Foster Care Recruitment and Retention Committee. They've got to come up with an acronym or something that is.
I call it the R&R group.
Oh, that's perfect. I like that. But yeah, DCS is trying to take seriously recruitment and retention, and they are looking at community and church leaders and saying, who can we pull into this group? What is currently happening, and how can we work together to increase the outcomes, to see more families involved, more families retained, and fewer children entering care.
Larry, you're aware that R&R was recruitment and retention, not rest and relaxation. Is that?
That's my point. Yeah, nice little play on that. It's definitely not R&R, rest and relaxation. At least it hasn't been for me so far.
And then another organization here locally is the Isaiah 117 Project. they primarily began as a bag stuffing ministry, so that when children in foster care rather were entering a new placement, they would have something to call their own. Oftentimes children are removed from their homes and they don't have anything that they are able to take with them. This is something that belongs to them, and it comes with resources that are helpful for at least that first night for foster families. They signed contracts with Peyton Manning Children's Hospital, St. Vincent, and Deaconess locations here in our area, meaning that they keep bags available at those local hospitals and restock as needed, so they know when children are coming into the hospital and are ultimately going to be removed from their parents or primary caregivers' responsibility, they have something that they can put in their hands. And then just this past weekend, I want to say they were able to give away 75 bicycles to children in care as part of their Dream Cycles initiative, something to bless foster families and children in care. They got on the news for that. It was very cool. But there are good things happening in our area, and there are certainly no shortage of ways for churches and individuals to kind of get their hands in and get involved and say that I have a part in this. But to echo what Brian said, I personally really want to see the knowledge base spread to the point that we are seeing an increase in foster families, so that we are reversing who's waiting. We don't want the children to be the ones who are waiting on good, stable care. Not in Indiana, not in Region 16. Has anybody thought of any questions or any comments or anything that they want to present to Brian? Or Brian, do you have anything else that you wanted to share with us?
I guess I have a question. I would love to hear what just people's what's your guys' gut on why do you think churches aren't activated and engaged in this issue as much as I think they should be by now? I mean, is it, do you think it's they just don't know that they would care if they were more aware, if they feel like it's too hard, or if they feel like it is a peripheral issue? I mean, what do you guys think?
This is just a gut reaction, not based on anything in particular, which I think is what you were asking for. It seems like foster care is something that requires a lot of commitment. And, you know, to your point, Brian, of being a mile wide and an inch deep, being an inch wide and a mile deep requires, you know, a lot of commitment. And I think in general, it just tends to feel easier, less risky, more inclusive of everyone in your congregation to have kind of that broader, narrower scope of things, because then each thing, you know, you're maybe seeing a few wins here, a few wins there, and you can feel like everybody in your church has something that they can participate in. Whereas to really make an impact in foster care requires a lot of impact, or requires a lot of commitment. It does create a deep impact, but you have to have people who are really focused on it. So I think the first step that you recommended as an action step is the most important one, because unless you find that person in your church who has the passion to be that committed, then it's not something that a church can sustain. You have to have the champion, you know, who can raise that banner within a congregation, I think.
Yeah.
And I'll add on to that. This again, no data to support this. It's just impression. One, I have heard from numerous people I had no idea about this problem. Though, I mean, it has been in our local newspaper. It's been on television a few times, calling attention to the issue. We did have a successful push last May during National Foster Care Awareness Month to get congregations communicated with and to about what the current need is. But I do get the impression that there is a significant disconnect between people in church and the community, any connection to foster care, if that makes sense.
Say that last part again.
I get the impression that there is a significant disconnect between people that are regularly attending church and knowing anyone that has ever had a child removed from their care.
See, and if you don't mind me kind of sharing, I agree that the commitment is huge, Jonathan. I would agree with that. But I think bridging that gap is the relational component. So they need to see these kiddos, they need to see these families, because a lot of it is the fear of the unknown. Their fear of, well, what am I actually saying yes to? Or there's these myths and stigma that exist about what they're going to be saying yes to and getting into. And I think that can be a challenge at times. It's easier to support the Isaiah 117 house that's opening up and I can do this, and it's easier to help with the bags than it is for that commitment and in that the relationship and the intentionality of it.
Absolutely.
So one of the hacks that I think we have that is pretty effective on trying to get to that point, and you pronounce your name Jara? Oh, you were on mute. I still don't know how to pronounce it.
It's Jara, Sarah with a J.
Thank you. Jara. So there is this research component where you're, and again, it's not like just academic. It's like meeting the family. You're like, oh gosh, didn't even know you were a foster family, or I've noticed a little bit, but like, tell me about it. How are you doing? And it starts building this relationship between the researcher and that family, and that researcher comes back, shares it a little bit more of like, hey, there's this family, and this is what they said. They've been fostering for 4 years. They've had 17 kids. Right now, this is their situation. They're thinking about quitting. They feel misunderstood, alone, no one. And so like, it's all that stuff. So there's that. The next thing that I think churches are built for, that's like simple, that actually is surprisingly relational, is this foster parents night out. It's basically a 4-hour VBS. It's Friday night, or it could be a foster morning night out on a Saturday morning. And it is what it sounds like. You drop off the kids. It's held in, your community center, your gym, whatever. Everybody who's there has been background checked. They've gone through a little bit of training about the kids, and there's, crafts in a bounce house and But what these people who are volunteering, if you like, it's a low level commitment. It's 4 hours. But they're actually meeting real kids in the foster care system. And they're like, it's not just a statistic anymore. These kids weren't scary. They met the families coming in and coming back. All of a sudden they're just like, okay, there's something more for me to do here besides a quarterly. I can do more than just a quarterly foster parents night out. Like, this family that dropped off this kid that I kind of connected with, like, can I, drop food by for you, once a week? I mean, it's one of the best hacks that we know, that churches are like, we're built for that kind of thing. Let's do it.
Yeah. And I think to Mike's point, a lot of people don't know anyone who really has had a child removed. They don't. As a CASA volunteer, this was all brand new stuff to me. It was just mind-boggling that this was even going on in our community. So, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? You eat them one bite at a time. You can't do it all at once. I think like last year we did this One Church, One Child campaign, and we went out to churches and said, hey, can we recruit more foster families? Well, that's a great thing if you can, but I think, as Brian said, the research part, just getting to know people who are already involved, dipping your toe in the water with parents' night out, things like that. Then what you do is you begin to break down barriers and introduce people to that problem. And then you start from there, that becomes your recruiting field for foster families many times as well. So those are things we can do, I think, locally. There are, I counted here the churches that were represented today, but there's enough churches here that 4 of you could get together and do a foster night, or 3 of you could do it 4 of you could do it once a quarter.
Cover the whole year.
And cover the whole year. Yeah. Actually, it would only take 3 of you once a quarter to cover the whole year. So I'll follow up with some of you on that point, but that's a great way to start building awareness and people who understand what the needs are. And then as you do, I think you begin to open up hearts to larger roles.
Mm-hmm. Let me say another thing. I think it's really important that a few churches take this extremely seriously, very deeply. There is I think a real temptation to like, hey, let's spread it out so no church carries one load too much. I've just never seen it happen. I've only seen like some churches just take a disproportionate amount of the work, and that's just the way it is. But there's something good about that, because the churches decide to take it seriously. They get better when it gets hard, and they learn about trauma, and then when families are a part of that church, they don't feel alone. So I think, my challenge is, can your church be one of those churches? And if your church isn't, there's nobody else coming. The church is it. Kiwanis Club, Lions Club. I mean, these groups are not going to do this. Like, there is no progressive group out there championing this. It's the church or nothing. So, is your church willing to do the thing that everyone else thinks is too hard to do? And to Susan's point, I mean, it's clear in Scripture, this is God's heart. All right. I don't know what the time is, time restriction here.
We're about 12 minutes past where we wanted to end, but I think it's all been good stuff. But yeah, let me just throw out one more thing. So the Foster Care Coalition is going to continue meeting, and we would love to have everybody on the call continue joining. I don't know exactly what that will look like the next time we get together. I'm going to go with my gut and say it'll probably be another Zoom meeting, just looking at the way things are going currently. I do look forward to a time when we could actually get together again in person. Larry May has alluded to the possibility of a connection with Hands of Hope. It's another organization in Indiana that has a number of resources and training tools available for churches that I think could be really valuable. And I would personally just love to hear what they have to share, what they've learned, what successes they've seen. Larry, can you remind me where in Indiana are they primarily working?
They work mostly in central and northern Indiana. They're based in Indianapolis.
Okay.
They have about 80 churches around the state, though, that are part of their church advocate network. And I think the ones of us down here who haven't heard of them could really benefit from being part of that network. So I'd love to introduce her to the group.
Yeah, I'd like that as well. So if you would like to stay connected, feel free to email me, Mike Shagrin at 4evansville.com, and feel free to contact Larry May as well, lmay at inkidsbelong.org. And we'll continue to learn from each other and help each other out, share resources. So thank you, everybody.
Brian, thanks so much for your time, and thanks to each of you who carved out some time to hear from Brian. It was a great meeting.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Everyone. Really appreciate my time with you. Thanks.
Thank you.